Okay. All right, John, I'm going to go.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. We're glad that you're here, and you're going to meet another coach from the Niswonger Rural Life, and we're so glad that you've joined us for our fall session, our fall learning series, and this will close out the work we've done on checking for understanding, and you'll see that our mini sessions were essential practice, feedback, collaboration, and in a digital world. And all those have been recorded. So if you'd like to go back and find them on YouTube, they're there. And we're just very, very glad you're here. And we just invite you to participate. And if you have any questions, we're going to give you some contact information. And our next slide, we'll just mention our Zoom procedures. You know how to, we're all becoming very good at Zoom. And if you need to minimize or maximize your screen, this will tell you how. You can use your escape button. And of course, we want you to feel free to use your chat. And we ask that it just helps the presenters if you will stay with us as much as possible, but we do ask that you go on mute while we're presenting, but we want you to be active and involved with us when you can. So thank you so much. All right. Again, I am Catherine Edwards, and I am a rural life coach with Niswonger, and my partner in crime is Sarah Kitzmiller, and she's also a rural life coach. And there are email addresses. Please feel free to reach out to us at any time. This is our agenda. Sarah, you want to speak to this?
Sure. We kind of chunked our session today into two big parts, but we will be essentially going over the design portion of checking for understanding as well as the usage of checking for understanding. And as you see, it's an essential systematic practice, some purpose, going into some feedback and collaboration with regards to usage.
We have session goals. Our goals we want you to be able to better design checks for understanding. In a lot of the literature, you see this acronym CFUs, checks for understanding, to capture learning, to capture where your students are, and also, we're going to use checks for understanding to improve our instructional responses to students. This should be one of our guiding practices, and there's all kinds of research to back us up to say that this is probably one of the most important tools that a teacher has in his or her toolbox. And we know administrators look how we're checking for understanding, and I can't stress enough that good checking for understanding is also a relationship builder with students, and in the big picture, even their parents.
All right, so checks for understanding design. We're going to hop in here, and as you know, teaching and learning is a cyclical adventure. How are the teachers learning from the processes that they're designing in their classroom? How are they learning from their students and the activities and materials that they assign to certain standards? And how are students? What is the continuous cycle of student learning like? And so you have these cycles going on all the time. And checking for understanding is a systematic approach to teaching and learning. It helps inform us in terms of our instructional practice and how we get to know our students, as Catherine mentioned, with regards to relationships. But it also is something that they are thinking about, especially if we think about middle school and we think about the middle school mindset. When you give them an assessment, they are checking for their own understanding, and they use that feedback to sometimes determine their self-worth. So this is something to invest in, both for the work that we do with standards and the work that we do with social emotional development. And again, thinking about all of the cycles of learning that are occurring. How is a teacher getting to know what their kids need, and how are students getting to know the content we need, but also how are students confirming or denying what they know about themselves and their capabilities. So it's about self-worth and value as well. So I would like for you to take a moment and let's play along. Which of the following is most important when it comes to deciding whether or not you will try a new idea in your classroom? Just choose a letter and drop in the chat. A, it aligns with my instructional approach. B, it is endorsed by my colleagues. C, it is endorsed by my school and district leadership. D, it's evidence-based. Or E, it is aligned with standards. Pick a letter and type in the chat. Oops.
When we were practicing this, I told Sarah there were a couple of them that I could hit, but she made me just choose one.
All right. I see a D, it's evidence-based, and it aligns with my instructional approach. Yeah. Oh, I see someone's chosen almost all of them. Yeah, all of these things. They definitely, it definitely makes you think about what motivates you to start something, to try something new. So I hope today in our session, if you have not tried one of these practices, that you will try something new, and kind of keep in mind that nothing really in our session is new research or new data or new information. It's been a part of teaching and learning for a long time, but maybe there might be some ideas that you can try on that are new. So aligning checks for understanding to purpose. So now that we know that checks for understanding just falls within the essential practice of teaching and the systems that are going on in our classroom, what are some things we can do to think about purpose when we start to plan? So one of those things is, what opportunities can I plan to support learning in my virtual classroom possibly? And there's really two ways to think about that. Are students with me, and are students understanding the content? And me personally, I feel like the first one we are definitely having to think about more now than ever, because we are in a virtual environment. And if we don't take the extra time to think about some of those almost managerial components of, do kids understand how to reply to me? Do kids understand how to communicate in the chat? Do they feel comfortable with those ways? That's going to need a little extra time to be successful. And our students understanding the content. That's what we typically assume checks for understanding is around, but we also need to think about checks for understanding when we think about participation in our virtual classroom. So design. So this, again, is part of that student learning cycle. It's part of cycles that we have, these questions might seem familiar to you with personalized learning or professional learning communities, PLCs as we have come to call them. But really, this is, again, part of a cycle of learning that occurs in a classroom, and it's a way for teachers to look at learning. But this can also help us when we think about design. So what do we want all students to know and be able to do? And when we think about the next one, how will we know if students got it? That's really what we're talking about when we think about activities. What activities will students complete? What evidence, data will I consider as a teacher to change my course of action based off what my kids are telling me? And when we think about alignment, sometimes we don't think about activities and alignment when we're planning, but that's one of the more crucial pieces. What little parts of that lesson can I align to those activities and materials that will ultimately lead to an assessment that will measure their growth and understanding? How will we respond when students do not learn? How will we extend the learning for students who are already proficient? And I love the last question. I think it doesn't get enough attention. But both of these, as a teacher, when I'm planning, I can think about this in terms of when and how will I support student needs in response to my instruction? What can I do when a kid does not learn something? What can I do when a kid already has it? When they already are showing me proficiency, have I been thoughtful enough to figure out how I can support them to the next step? I like to throw this in here because sometimes planning perfection can cause you to freeze up. You just kind of like throw in the towel. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. So planning for perfection can prevent action, and I just would like to say that action in the case of checking for understanding is way better than no action. your response to the check is just as important as what activity aligns to the check. So it's, again, it's that, like that mug, like it's not on the lesson plan. Sometimes those things that aren't on the lesson plan are the most beautiful. And we have an example of that coming up here in just a few minutes. So I want you to know that the best laid plans can be blown out of the water, and don't worry, it's still a beautiful thing. But sometimes we feel like we're spinning on our heads as teachers when that happens, right? Like this guy breakdancing who clearly has strong core muscles. So what are some effective tools for feedback, for checking for understanding, for thinking about peeking in on what my kids know? How can I figure that out? And so here are just some great tools to think about. Ask the 4 questions, host a one-on-one conference, concentrate on one ability. I love that because we oftentimes want to give kids too much information about what they didn't do well. Let's focus on one clear point so that they can accomplish it and feel like they can do it. Ask another adult to give feedback, have the student take notes, give genuine praise, I noticed, provide a model or example, invite students to give you feedback. All of these are great ways to check for understanding. And here's what I'd like for us to do. Today, we're gonna watch a 6th grade ELA teacher in action. So when you think about this video, as you're watching this video, kind of have the lenses on of what effective strategies did she use in this lesson with regards to checking for students' understanding of the instruction. What were some, not only what is she saying, but what are the kids doing? So kind of notice on both sides. So let's share and reflect a little bit. What strategies did you see her use? And just in general, what resonated with you?
I thought that I enjoyed watching her be in the teacher power zone. She was walking around and doing assessments, on the fly as she went, by being in the power zone, being in the students' areas.
I saw that too.
I'll add something that resonated with me was their obvious routine for cycles of learning and reflection, right? So in that agenda for students, they knew that they were going to set a goal, dig into the work, reflect. Set another goal, dig into the work, reflect, and kind of go through that cycle of learning. Makes me think of the images you showed earlier in the session.
Yep, I love how she does that. And she makes it look so easy.
Clearly she's taught that routine and that expectation. Not something kids just know how to do, obviously, but.
Right. And taking it on a virtual platform, the thumbs up, thumbs down would even work virtually. And I read an article just this week in Edutopia about how a lot of teachers are actually using sign language to do virtual checks. And so the kids are learning some sign language, but that's a solid, quiet way to get a virtual feedback.
I liked the sheet. It's like the old adage, you tell them what you're going to tell them, then you tell them, and then you tell them what you just told them. So she wraps it all up at the end with the debrief. I like that.
Exactly. That was very well said. Yes. I also found myself, and I know I was having you kind of think about the effective strategies that she was using, but what I ended up doing, and I didn't mean to do this in my own, in part of our presentation, but this idea of, are you with me? Or are you understanding the content? I could kind of divide the strategies that she was using and how she sort of talked those out. Like she would do one, are you with me kind of thing, and then kind of go deeper and sort of did that just kind of like all of the cycles. She was intentionally doing some things to keep them on the course and keep them focused, not necessarily using checking for understanding to just focus on the content. So I kind of was able to see that this time when I watched that video. Thank you for sharing.
I liked her organization of how, she had the daily learning target. Kids knew piggybacking off of Brittany, not Brittany, Bethany. Sorry. But just the way that she was, she realized that several were not getting it, and stop and make sure that then that they do understand. So just really being aware of what her students are doing.
Good point.
I really liked that too. She even said everybody getting on the train or something like that. She made an analogy to a train, I remember. So now we're going to jump into checks for understanding for usage. So remember when I said that as we plan for all this stuff to happen when we start using checks for understanding in the classroom, and then reality happens, right? So it doesn't always go great. If anything, I would like for this video to be evidence for you as a teacher to know that instruction that is off the plan, when planned well, instruction that is off the plan is beautiful. Okay, so it's amazing what we can do in the classroom. And so I hope this video is proof to you of that. So in this video, and I really like that this is a kindergarten teacher, it kind of shows the depth of their work and highlights that depth to which they think about their work. But she has to switch up her lesson when students don't get where they want to be. So again, I want this to be proof to you that sometimes the best laid plans can go awry, but it's really a beautiful thing. So as we're watching, kind of think about how did she support the redirection of the learning, and how did knowing her standard and objective help her know what she needed the students to say and do? So again, not to repeat too much debriefing, but I really thought there were some valuable things in that video for us to witness today. And so how did she know students were not understanding? Or how did she adjust her plan? What kind of resonated with you out of this video today?
I thought, well, one of the first things that resonated was the fact that everybody that was watching the video started smiling when they saw those kids and that enthusiastic young teacher who just obviously is passionate about her role and conveyed that well to students. But, you know, she definitely let the students guide her feedback and checking for understanding in a healthy and good and positive way. They didn't know that they weren't giving her what she wanted.
I think that the essence of her own humility stood out to me, because it's easy to go, this is what I had planned and I'm doing it, you know? But she was like, I think after circulating and really listening and you know, taking in what kids were saying or not saying for that matter, or doing or not doing, she was humble enough to say, I need to step back. I can get them into centers and redirect and use that time to get to know what kids or get a chance to hear from some students. And that is what really allowed her to surface that example.
Yeah, I agree. And I think too, Bethany, it brought to light to me, especially, this is the second or third time I've watched this video, and I really, every time I watch it, I always walk away with something else. But I think today that's exactly what resonated with me. She could have easily taken her frustration out even on her class, heaven forbid, but she used that checking for understanding as an opportunity to get to know her students. And I couldn't help but wonder, how often had Ozzy, you know, that was definitely the highlight of Ozzy's day, to be able to share in front of his peers and to have that as a point of reference. And so again, it definitely reinforced her goal for the activity, even though it wasn't exactly how she planned it. But then it also allowed possibly the kids to see a student, a peer, model it. And I liked what she was talking about with regards to that. I felt like that was kind of a cool way to think about giving him that opportunity of saying it the best way for them to be able to understand. And that she kind of realized, I'm not doing a great job. I need Ozzy's help.
And one of our participants put in the chat, Sarah, that she noticed that they, meaning the students, reverted to a simpler process. And of course, she agreed about the passionate nature of the teacher. So I thought that was a good statement.
So checking for understanding gone awry is better than no checking for understanding at all. So even though she'd probably put in there as those Post-it notes for the original way to check for understanding, she realized very quickly that there needed to be a reteaching opportunity as she was collecting them. So her response to the check is almost impossible to plan for perfectly. It just needs to happen based off your teacher expertise and knowledge. And so again, part of our message here is that you are the special sauce that it takes to really execute this well. Even when you don't feel like it's going well, there's a lot of wonderful things that's happening in your classroom when you are noticing what kids need to improve.
Sarah, I'll just add on one thing that as a teacher, I need to know too, before I jump into that lesson, what would be that exemplar response that I'm after, right? From all students, so that I can then know, am I getting what I'm after? Am I not? If not, I might be tempted to just kind of round up answers and take things, close enough. But what's the exemplar answer I'm seeking, and what am I going to do if I don't get that? How am I going to scaffold kids to get there? And in this case, take a complete step back, redirect, and try it again another way.
Well, and there was some language she used at the end too that I loved, like one text reminds me of another text. And I kind of even wondered, I wondered if she also noted that maybe the next time she teaches this, that if she used reminds as one of the phrases that could support making the actual text-to-text connection, because I thought it was cool that she was saying, they were going back to, I think, I feel, I believe, so they were making a text-to-self connection. But again, it's just the complexity of how that instruction goes, and I also thought that was cool to see a kindergarten teacher's work highlighted in that way.
Well, we would certainly be amiss if we didn't talk about the impact of virtual learning. And where a year ago today, did we ever think that our world would be where we are, and that teachers would be teaching the way they are? And it's like, we can't even when we get back to normal, I don't think we should ever forget the lessons that we learned in the past, and today being the past. But, as coaches, we've worked with a lot of teachers the last few weeks, and we've seen a lot of frustration, a lot of pain, a lot of sadness, just a lot of things going on. And, if you don't get anything out of our presentations, if you're having to do all of this by virtual, or even now you're in a hybrid model where you're still using part virtual learning, we give you permission to think about what you're going to teach, what your goals are, what do you want your students to learn, not the tools. There is a plethora of things out there to use. But you know what? A colleague of ours with Leading Edge Learning said this, and she gave us permission to quote, "Spend time on learning goals, not tools." So, sometimes we just have to take care of ourselves like that. Well, we've all had feedback nightmares. And when I found this graphic, I thought, today it's really appropriate. I want you to take just a few minutes and reflect back, think about in your own life when you've received feedback and it was maybe negative and it was powerful. And think about maybe some experience in a few sentences that you're willing to share with us. And then, we won't do this today, but this would be a great for admin that are watching the sessions. This would be a great thing to do in some PLCs and maybe some faculty meeting moments, some do's and don'ts for giving feedback. I think we need to remind teachers how powerful giving feedback is. But is anybody that's listening right now and watching, Can you think about a time, Sarah, maybe you can, that you received some kind of feedback that you still remember at your old ripe age right now?
I have several examples I could share, but the one that I definitely thought about that I feel like is most appropriate is I'll never forget my junior year in high school. We had to turn in these essays. There were speeches that we had to write about a topic. And as the teacher finished them, she would give them to students. And so she made a comment at the end of the day that she had given back all of the essays that she had graded that she felt worthy of, standing on a podium and delivering. And my essay wasn't given back to me. And so I'll never forget that feeling of like, first of all, it's the first speech I'd ever written. I had no rubric or no model. We had listened to speech, several different speeches that were given, but I really didn't have like a model. So I felt like totally blindsided and also embarrassed that my speech had not been handed back to me. And in fact, I never got my speech back, thankfully, because I think I would have been more embarrassed getting it back and redoing it. But to know that was the only lesson that I was ever taught on writing a speech, and I never got my essay back, but I just knew it was not good enough to be delivered on a stump somewhere publicly. Maybe I'm thankful I didn't get the speech back, but I'll never forget the feeling of, first of all, you can't write a speech, and then I didn't know what I had to do to make my speech better. So it was like terrible because I had no feedback other than, you can't do this, obviously. It was very sad.
I think teachers have to watch sarcasm levels, and I think that plays into feedback and social emotional learning. And as a former high school person, I'm probably kind of guilty of that. But I remember one time when I was in the second grade, I asked a question, and it was a serious question in my heart. I really was confused on a point, and the teacher just kind of treated it like I was trying to be a joke. And you know what? It took me a long time to speak up again. And that's feedback. Anybody else? Well, think about this, and like I say, if there's any administrators that are watching this is worth spending time on.
I will say that feedback, before we get started, there is a little yielding I would like for us to do. And one of the ways I'd like for us to yield is we really have to think about, kind of like Catherine was talking about in her second grade classroom, that we have to invest in your classroom to magnify the benefits of feedback. If you give feedback or set up situations for students to give feedback to each other, or even just over assess, which is feedback in the middle school classroom, particularly because it's just confirming what they believe about themselves that they can't do it. We need to think about what are some things that we can set up in our classroom to support the positive effects of feedback. And here are just some suggestions. Number one, we all need time to think and learn. It's okay to make mistakes. That's the way we learn. We can do more and learn more when we are willing to take a risk. And it's okay to ask for help. No one need to do it all alone. Because ultimately what's driving me to say this is a lot of us get confused that the idea of feedback is to prevent the need, to increase accuracy. Like if I give you this feedback, that means that every single time you do this, you're going to get better and better and better, and you're going to be more and more accurate. Well, it's kind of like this idea that we never really arrive there, right? Like we can always find something to improve. And so again, thinking about the teaching and learning cycle, it never ends. And that's the way we need to have kids think about learning, that failure is never final or fatal, and that we can always do something to improve where we're at. So that we don't get stuck in giving kids feedback that ultimately can impact negatively their self-view and impact their, have conversations with each other that can be negative. So we need to make it very clear that our culture in our classroom is supportive of making mistakes and learning from them. And I feel like as a teacher, that's going to also relieve your ability to feel frustrated with yourself. So I just wanted to yield to that thought as we
Hey,
move
and
forward.
Sarah, we had a chat comment that's interesting. The classroom space, in person or virtual, needs to feel safe to not know the answer or make mistakes. That reinforces what you're saying and what we're thinking.
Yeah, because that whole purpose of feedback is not to be, the purpose of feedback is not to stop learning and not to get to that point where we've got it, we've made a 100, we're done learning. It's really part of the process of learning. So I just feel like it's important our culture and our classroom supports that. And it's difficult, so.
As we kind of start coming towards the end of our presentation, let's think about this is maybe a little bit redundant, but what does feedback provide? It's an indicator that students are where they need to be. It indicates levels of understanding. It indicates points of confusion. I think of in a math class where you're such sequential learning, there can't be much confusion on certain steps, or they're totally blocked. I think sometimes in ELA you don't understand something, but you still have opportunities to keep learning. But there are subjects where it's a little bit more difficult. Indicates readiness to move on, and then who needs support. And then as teachers and instructors, when we see that there's support needed, there's all kinds of things there. If it's an IEP or a 504 issue, that's where you think about how are you wisely using the help of assistants in the classroom. Differentiation, personalized learning, all of that comes into play when you come into support. Maybe if it's a virtual situation, maybe it's a little bit of one-on-one conversation with that student or a couple of students to clear it up. So it's continual. Guiding questions. Okay, when we plan, we have to plan for feedback. It's something that's not going to just happen on its own very well. Research says that feedback should be occurring. Teachers should be looking for feedback from students every 8 to 11 minutes. And I think that newer teachers maybe struggle with this, and they kind of have to get into that habit. Really experienced good teachers, it becomes just part of their makeup, and they just do it every few minutes in some ways, sometimes just so slight. But how are the students going to show me? When you're doing the planning, you need to think about this. What are the learning goals of the lesson? And what is the end result? What's the summary of that learning going to look like? How am I going to solicit self-evaluations from learning goals? Let them practice on each other before they give feedback to you in some small group work if they're with each other. Virtually, ask for that feedback, ask for chat, ask for some you could do some things like through Google Docs and things like that. And we've got just a really small section on some ideas like that. But how am I going to reconcile the students' feedback on learning and my own evaluation? In a perfect world, we wouldn't be given A's, B's, C's, or D's, and F's. But the bottom line is, our educational systems requires us to give grades. So how are you reconciling grades and feedback? And again, you hope and that the really good teachers, it's a very personalized thing. That A to one student might not be the very same A to another. But that's where the trust comes in and the build. And you've got to have a plan. You really do have to have a plan for this. Anybody have anything else to say about any of this? Agree or disagree? Well, here's an example of an exit ticket. I had a good time creating this. I was on YouTube, and you can learn how to do everything on YouTube, everything, even cook. And but I watched this teacher working on exit tickets. I made a Google slide, and I just played around with shapes, and I used the very same questions that the teacher used in this. If I were actually using this, I might change the questions a little bit to fit more of what I would say. But I made a Google slide, and then I saved it and made it in as a PDF, and then I brought it back up and see where it says answer here? This is a ticket that students could actually, on a virtual platform, write a brief answer. And they couldn't mess with any of the things that I have there in my questions. But, you know, when I was working and playing with this, I actually thought, you know, how much fun it would be to make it personalized to my classroom. You know, all of us who've been in the classroom for more than a few weeks know that classes take on personalities. Is it a real sports-minded class? Is it a real math-minded class? Is it a playful, talky class? You know, you can make your exit tickets fit the culture and the personality of your students. This was just a sample I played around with from learning something on YouTube. And
Catherine, can I say something too?
Yeah, sure.
Your exit ticket is in the bit.ly in our materials.
That's
and
right.
If they want to copy this, you've got it fixed already for them where these questions can't be tampered with by the students, but they can enter answers. So
exactly. So
utilize that.
So feel free to use that. And I did use the same questions as the teacher when I was playing around with this, but it was fun. Also, even if we go back into the classrooms, I have had several teachers I'm working with talk about a fear of handling a lot of papers day in, day out. And so there's, you know, we're never going to go back to a lot of things the way we used to do even this time last year. So make your exit tickets electronically. It's one less piece of paper that you're going to be handling. You know, think about something like that. Then this was just a quote. I got this from Edutopia, and I used it in a previous presentation, and I just absolutely love it. Teachers of high-performing online classes, in other words, read the virtual room and collect feedback, not just to gauge how well students understand the subject matter, but also to identify any obstacles that may be preventing them from being able to fully participate. And then I put where the article it came from. That is our ultimate goal, and it goes back to that slide. Think about your learning goal. Don't think about the razzle-dazzle of all the tools. You know, we're all a little bit vulnerable in this new way of teaching. And again, let me say that if we went back tomorrow, I think that teaching and learning is forever changed in a lot of ways in a year. We've lived through a pretty incredible time, but the need for feedback will never, never, never change, but just how we get it might look a little bit different.
So we're going to kind of shift gears from feedback as one strategy to also talk about another strategy that you can utilize as you plan for checks for understanding and use checks for understanding in your classroom. And one of those ways is collaboration. And collaboration provides students with the opportunity to know what they know and know what they don't know. And again, thinking about the middle school brain at this time, every opportunity, every question they receive either confirms or, tells them, oh, wait, you knew this, good for you. You can do hard things. So again, it's a good opportunity for them to collaborate with their peers and have that kind of chance to talk about with their peers what they know. And students with the opportunity, collaboration provides students with the opportunity to learn from their peers. And again, like Catherine was saying earlier, we are in a very changed environment, and I do believe that peer collaboration is more meaningful now than ever before for students because of their lack of interaction. And so using that digital platform as a way to have safe collaboration is something that's probably worth your time to invest in thinking about how that's going to work in your classroom. Students with the opportunity, it also provides students with the opportunity to rely on retrieval practice, which it boosts learning by pulling information out of their heads rather than focusing on getting information into their heads, which a lot of times we do. It's like, let's stuff all this information into your head, but retrieval practice allows us to pull information that we've acquired over the course of a lesson possibly, or a 10-minute learning session. So giving them an opportunity to retrieve that information a lot of times can help support positive self-concept and having that conversation with a peer. I know you've heard of Think, Pair, Share before. That's a popular one. One that may not be as popular that I'd like to talk to you a little bit about, but first, I'd like for us to have a conversation. What kinds of collaboration have worked for you?
Well, Sarah, we're hearing a lot about Jamboard, Flipgrid, all those, and they're easily accessible. There's all kind of tutorials on YouTube. They're very safe to use.
We actually have some of those too in our materials.
Exactly. If you, yeah, I'm really proud of that material slide, because a lot of what we said is going to be there, and it would be well worth a visit to go back to that.
All right. So this is kind of another strategy that I'd just like to leave you with. There's a very quick video before we go here that I want to talk to you about. It's called the Chalk Talk strategy, and it's in practice, so we're going to get to see it utilized in the classroom. If you're in a virtual environment, you might want to think about how would this work in a virtual setting. I think it would translate well to that setting, again, using some of those tools that Catherine had mentioned. But you might want to think about what the students are doing and what the teacher is doing, and when would this be a good strategy to use? Like I was saying, this is a real short video highlighting a practice that she kind of capped off for me at the end. This was really about what am I going to do for my next day's instruction. She uses the result of her Chalk Talk. But the kids kind of get to respond to each other and have this interaction. So what were your thoughts? What are some things that resonated with you?
A comfort zone for students, I think, is the big point.
I liked how the young boy said that they were able to have a voice, but without, he didn't use these words, but without screaming it from the mountaintop. They could also be anonymous if needed, I
also liked how there was a low stakes participation guide, like they had clearly some sort of annotation where they could put stars next to kids that they agreed with and didn't agree with. So if they didn't want to have to labor through writing that, they could still participate in the activity. Say writing was an issue. It allowed them to still participate. All right. Catherine, do you want to close this out?
I'm not going to take us through this, but again, if this recording is ever used for teacher discussion, PLCs, or anything like this, this is some of our colleagues' favorite exit ticket. This is good for students or adult of all ages, even adult learners. And it's a good reflective piece. What are you going to stop? And what will you slow down and modify? And then what will you start? And you should not have the same answers day to day to year, from beginning of the career to the end of the career. So this is just a good one. And I believe if I were back in the classroom again, I literally might have this laminated and put on my desk to look at all the time.
Well, and I just would like to say that we appreciate your participation in our session today, and hope that you've learned something, that you are walking away with some ideas that you might start to try in your classroom based off of your learning today. We've enjoyed our time with you, and hope you have a great rest of the year.
Don't forget that you can access these materials and use anything that you find there, and where our sources came from. And we hope that you have picked up some good strategies and some good high impact practices. And we do have a slide there. We would like a little bit of feedback. And if you look at this later and want to give us feedback, like, y'all should not be doing this, That's feedback and we'll take it. So feel free to access our materials, and we like to thank all of you for being here today and listening to us. And we like to thank John Payne for forever being our tech support.
Thank you.